Brand nerds, we back at you in 2025. I'm still bugging a little bit, LT, that we are actually in a new year. Now we're deep enough into the year where it is inappropriate, some would say, to say Happy New Year. But I'm gonna say it anyway, brand nerds. I'm gonna say it anyway. Happy New Year to all of you all. And we're coming in hot in 2025, coming in hot. So today, brand nerds, a couple things I want you to know about the guest that we have for you today. The first one is this. You've heard me say, you've heard Larry say that marketing is really about psychology. It's about how people think and about how they behave. And LT, the guest that we have today knows something about psychology. You'll get into that later. The second thing, brand nerds around the world, 100 plus countries. Larry, I cannot believe that there are folks in 100 plus countries who would actually want to listen to our dear podcast. It's stunning to me, but I'm very happy about it, brand nerds. So you brand nerds all around the world, we thank you. And today's guest knows a lot about globality. So this is someone who's not just going to be speaking with you all from a US perspective. They're going to be speaking with you from a perspective that is truly global. And third,
did you just make up a new word, globality? I love it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a real word or not. You know, I got dyslexia, Larry. So, you know, I be making up shit. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And then third, but certainly not last, or least, I should say. Brand nerds, in our business with brand positioning doctors, we talk about 3 levels of clients. At the base level are the buyers. So these are the people that hire us. And we are respectful to these clients because they buy our services. One level up from that is the brand or business. And this is sometimes where we get into a conflict with the buyer, because when we believe something is right for the brand or business and it's different than what the buyer thinks, we're going to let them know. We're going to let them know. Yeah, we're going to call it. And we don't care if the buyer threatens the business. We don't care about that. We're like, we're here to grow the brand and business. And if we do that, you, the buyer, are going to be fine. But at the highest level, our client is, and I got this from Brother Stephen Green and Chris Robinson, our highest level client is humanity.
Yep.
Humanity. So we serve humanity and we seek to pull our clients up to do something meaningful for humanity. And Larry, our guest today has dedicated her life to doing something positive for humanity. So LT, break down for the peoples who we have in the building today.
D, that was really great preface, man. That was awesome. So DC,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We have Lulite Ejigu in the house today. Welcome, Lulite.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're really happy to have you. So, okay, brand nerds, as you know, we are fully transparent with you. Now in our 7th year of the podcast. How about that, D? That's also mind-blowing, right?
Crazy. Yeah.
We have had more than 150 guests, many of whom are incredible people that DC and I are fortunate to have worked with or known. And most of the others are recommendations from friends of the podcast who we know and trust. This is one of those. Our friend Tawanda Carlton and her company, Tenet Consulting, a great PR communications group, have been on us saying, you've got to get Lulite on the podcast. So here she is. Lulite has a much different background, as DC already alluded to, than most of our guests, but we think you will soon learn why we are really looking forward to this. So growing up in Texas, Lulite attends Texas Tech University. And as DC alluded to earlier, she earns an undergrad degree in psychology and communication studies. So after Texas Tech, Lulite actually begins her career as an underwriter, first with Morgan Stanley, then at Capital One. She continues to move on and up, going to Citi first as VP Compliance Officer before being promoted to SVP of Global AML. Now, brand nerds, D, Lulite, I have to be honest with you. I had to Google what AML is. And brand nerds, I found out that this acronym is anti-money laundering. Is that right, Lulite?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, cool. So Lulite,
I didn't know that.
I had no
idea.
Yeah.
No idea. You learned something new. So Lulite then gets tapped on the shoulder to join JP Morgan as Executive Director for Risk Management, where she's overseeing an $800 billion mortgage asset portfolio, and driving strategic projects focused on evaluating emerging economic risks. Okay, brand nerds, you may be asking us, so what does this have to do with marketing? This is where Lulite takes a big pivot. Where in around 2020, she becomes a dedicated advocate for economic development, social impact, and financial inclusion as the CEO of Tiva Capital. Tiva Capital is a consulting and management company focusing on international clients and partnerships with a target on expanding trade with the African continent. She also serves as the president and chairman of the board of directors for the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund. EDTF unites Ethiopians worldwide to fund vital sustainable projects in Ethiopia, transcending ethnic, religious, and political divides with a focus on creating lasting positive change. That was what DC was alluding to. And lastly, Lulite has a book coming out called The Unexpected Global Shift, delving into driving sustainable growth in Africa, an emerging market many unwisely overlook. We're really looking forward to this one, brand nerds. Welcome to Brands, Beats, and Bytes, Lulite Ejigu.
Thank you. Thank you. So glad to be here today. And what's interesting about when you hear your own bio, it's kind of awkward.
Mhm.
You're like, wait, that sounds like a different person. But I actually started my career in collections. So
Oh, wow.
graduated in the recession, the financial recession, and back to DC Elite 2 on my psychology degree. I wanted to go to law school, and I took a break. I had a friend who was working at a bank at the time who was like, hey, they're trying this new program and trying to find people who have psychology degrees to talk to customers who are losing their homes because
Oh, wow.
agents don't have any empathy. And so I was a guinea pig, and I was, a really good collector. So I started collecting, and then I went and started learning the regulations and started learning the policies. And there's a lot of programs coming out with the Obama programs that were coming out for refinancing and modifying loans to keep people in their homes so they don't lose their houses to foreclosure at a very sensitive time. And so that's kind of how I got into banking. I was not supposed to be in banking, but it's basically where I spent my entire career. So yeah.
I'm so glad you added that.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a lot of fun conversations at that time, but I really, really enjoyed it. And it was one of those things where I had decided to not be a therapist. I was kind of going back and forth about, do I want to actually prescribe medicine? I like more like holistic type of approach. And so I decided to use my psychology degree to go to law school. And then, went into banking and just kind of kept advancing, went back and got my MBA, and just kind of learned more about international business. And that's kind of what grew that passion for anti-money laundering and international policies and regulations and trade, which ended up being much more fascinating and dealing with different cultures around the world, which allowed, I think the work to be more fruitful and more exciting for me because I was using some of that communication, psychology. How do you tell your story? How do you explain? And so that's been fun. Yeah. So that's kind of how I kind of landed in finance by accident. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yes, Lulite, I want to go back to something you said about being a collector, and you were pretty good. You were pretty good at it.
Yeah.
What made you good at it?
In a weird way, I never cut customers off. If they're going through a divorce, if they had lost a family member, if there was a medical issue, I talked them through it. And I would have been a horrible therapist because I'm like, okay, what are we going to do about this? What program can we do? And so I would immediately I would spend all of my free time. And granted, I was the only person who didn't have 30 years of mortgage experience at that time. The industry was mortgage is a very complex product, and also sensitive in nature because it's usually, primary residences and it's very sensitive for the banks. and I would never cut them off. And in collections, you are graded by the quality of your call. Like, did you give them all the policies? Did you give them all the information correctly? How quickly you can get off the phone? So handle time.
Okay.
And did you get a resolution? And I was just perfect on all three. I'm not even gonna lie. It's probably one of the things that I've done that I just was really good at. And I think I needed to be in that role at that specific time because it was probably the first time where the finance industry actually changed to have to like care for the customer. You know?
Right.
It was like a huge, like, it was probably, I would say, a historical shift in finance. And here I am with like this wanting to help people, you know, passion. And it really did. I used to have like customers who would find our address and like send me a package. Of course, I couldn't accept it, but they would send me things. And that was just like
Wow.
Very, very unheard of. And, you know, I would cry on the call. Like, I mean, I know the people who would listen to my calls are like, this is crazy, but I would just allow it to flow. And then I would allow the conversation to get to, okay, where do we take this from here? And, you know, tell them about local programs. And I just was really passionate about it. So I tend to learn about all the local, you know, community organizations that were helping people that can help, you know, fill out the applications, or I would help them myself, you know, by saying, okay, here's the information I need, go grab this and then bring it back to me. And then we can, you know, and I would schedule a time and I'll find a way to call them back at a time that made sense. So yeah, so it was a balancing act because I had to also perform and meet my metrics while also, you know, making those calls very meaningful. So I really did it. Actually, I really did enjoy it. So,
You know what I'm struck with, Dee, is that whoever had the thought that maybe we should get some folks with a psychology degree, Lulite is prime A example that that was a good idea.
Yes.
It was what's funny. I'm actually almost every role I took, I was a guinea pig. So I was tapped for it. It was created for me. It was a new issue. I guess kind of how tech, you know, you're trying to solve a problem. So it wasn't like I ever took roles where there was somebody in the role and then I'm just like doing some like business as usual and just a backfill. It was always like a new project or a new area or some issue that we were having, that like, you know, I kind of like served a purpose and then I moved on. Yeah.
Super.
A bit of a pioneer.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
All right, brand nerds. We like numbers around here, so I want to give you a couple of numbers related to what Lulite is talking about. Because when Lulite is calling you, it's because you can't pay your bills. So we can't pay. We can't pay our bills. And I have had many experiences in my lifetime, Lulite and Larry, and one of them was talking to collectors at a point in my life. So some of you brand nerds may be hearing this, and if you find yourself in this situation, you might be going, "Oh wow, like I'm in this situation. What have I done wrong?" And maybe you have done some things wrong. But let me democratize this notion of collections for a moment. 60% of the American population is unable to afford an emergency of $500. 60%.
Let that sink in for a second.
Yeah,
Think
60%.
about that.
40% of the American public cannot go 2 weeks without a paycheck and pay their bills. And it's more than 65%, approaching 70%, who cannot afford to go a month and still make their bills. Lastly, the number one reason for bankruptcy in this country is medical debt.
Yep.
We know that because one of our clients, Aflac, is a viable option with supplemental insurance to handle expenses that health insurance does not cover. I say all this to say this, brand nerds, it's rough out here. Like it's rough out here. And I would encourage you all who find yourselves in these different constituent pools to understand you're not alone. And when you get someone like Lulite who gives you a call, and Lulite, you did not mention this word, but I would fathom a guess that in one word, one of the reasons why you were effective is because of dignity.
Yeah.
You treated these people with dignity. So I want to thank you for that. And I wanted to break those numbers down. We are going to now transition into get comfy. And this is where I ask you a question to sort of get you started before we get into the specific questions of the podcast.
And DC, I don't want to,
Oh,
I don't want to cut you off, but
yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say something based off what you said about dignity.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've been there too. You know, I've had to talk to collectors.
So have I.
We, you know, mistakes I made of, you know, we'll go back to the psychology. And when we talk about, you know, like more about my experience and other things that, you know, will come up is I have a avoidant personality type. I don't like conflict. And a lot of times that collection kind of taps into that psyche that, okay, if I don't pay attention to it, it'll kind of go away.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I would actually recommend, and something that I recommend to myself, I have to like, I make these same mistakes. It's just make the phone call. Just make the phone call. And 9 times out of 10, there's a program. There's a you know, a credit suppression, which means that they won't report to your credit. There's, you know, a correction that can be made. There's a plan that they can kind of hold your payments while, you know, you're, you know, figuring your hardship out, which is, you know, called a forbearance, or, you know, it's different things for different products in banking. And I've worked at a lot of different products, so I know it's very similar. But what I would say is not just the dignity of the person that may be on the other line, or just not being avoidant, you know, just try, make the attempt and ask for help. And 9 times out of 10, that vulnerability will save you.
Wow. Brand nerds, take that to heart.
Yeah.
I bet you didn't know you'd be getting that out of this podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Lulite.
Sure.
All right, so on to the get comfy section. So Lulite, you got a book coming out, The Unexpected Global Shift. I want to focus on the word unexpected. One of our guests, Lulite, his name is Oren. Is it Katzif, Larry?
Yes. Yep.
Oren Katzif. He's a big into content. Like, this dude has built content companies, very successful content companies. He was on and he said to us, if you consider any great piece of content, movie, TV show, short form content, book, they all have the same thing in common, Lulite, and it is the stuff you don't know about the stuff you know. The stuff you don't know about the stuff you know. Go ahead. Go. You about to react to that? Then I'm gonna get into a question.
I was just gonna say, that's all I was gonna say. That's just perfect.
It's deep.
That's strong. That's strong.
Very much.
So to set this question up, Lulite, brand nerds, I'm gonna break some stuff down that you may not know about the stuff you know. Brand nerds, y'all know about the continent of Africa, but here's what you may not know. Over the last 30 years, the middle class has tripled. That would be 3 times, brand nerds. And right now, in the middle class in Africa, there are more than 310 million people in it. Just for like numbers' sake, in the US, 40% of our population is in the middle class. So we're about 330 million people. So even if we cut it in half, let's go up from 40 to 50%, because it used to be 61. It's gone down from 2000 to the 2020s. So if we go 50%, we're talking about 115 million people in the US. And I know the US is a country and Africa is a continent, but the US is heralded as the beacon of financial stability. Yep. So Africa as a continent has more than double the number of people in a middle class than the US. And furthermore, by the year 2060, Africa is projected to have 1.1 billion, that's with a B, people in the middle class. 1.1 billion. So when I hear this unexpected in your book, what I'm curious about is that help us better understand where this book is coming from, and if you could contextualize the actual growth that's happening economically in Africa and Ethiopia as well versus the perceptions.
Yeah, I'm glad you ended with perceptions. Because it's not a failure of, you know, economists and others not seeing the numbers. It's kind of like, you know, going back to the financial recession, what really happened there was people didn't think the housing market would go down. I forgot what the
Right.
actual theory is. It's like we like either like from a market projected perspective, we go more optimistic. So there's
Yep.
it wasn't that the numbers didn't show it. Like my
Yeah.
mentors, they knew, years before.
Mhm.
So the numbers told the story, but it was the perception of growth. It was the American dream. It was,
Right.
it was cultural things that actually swayed or distorted what was actually happening, the truth. And
Mhm.
similar to what's happening in Africa, I think that Africa is kind of supposed to be the poverty-stricken place,
Yep. Mhm.
people first heard about Ethiopia with what was it, the 80s or 70s famine,
Yep.
it was all, they used to call me like, oh, so you're a starving Ethiopian, in
Mhm.
school, because it would
Mhm.
be, it was very
Yep.
common. You see the commercials,
Yep.
growing up, and that's kind of all people knew, about Africa. And at that time too, I think it was Reagan who allowed and changed a lot of immigration policy. And you had a lot of people that either came to the US or were about to come to the US for education,
Mhm.
or either actual refugees that were allowed to come into the US, get the work visas or get the student visas. It changed the whole dynamic. A lot of those people,
Mhm.
my parents and that generation that came, they weren't expecting to stay in the US. They're expecting to go
Mm.
back to the country, get the education they needed, and go back, or wait
Right.
till the government or the instability at that time was corrected, and then they could kind of go back. So you have this whole generation of people who were the best, most educated, high risk takers, business leaders, refugees, highly resilient. And you can see that some Harvard has done studies on this too, where you're kind of getting almost kind of like an adverse population. And
Mhm.
so then they tend to perform very well in that new country because they're appreciative of the policies, they're appreciative of,
Mhm.
the freedom, they're appreciative of all these things that we, as Americans, we take for granted now, but all these, abilities that we have, and then they can really, you know, um, expand and grow and multiply. And then they operate as a community. So then they make sure that their kids and their cousins and all the people that they know are also benefiting. They say like a dollar stays in the Jewish community for 8 days or 8 days or something like that. And I don't know if you guys know these metrics. And then in African American community, it might be, I think it's like -2, and that's because of
Mhm.
leverage, right? That's because of not having access to capital. Then the capital that you then get is then at a higher rate. So then you're always
Mhm.
paying interest. And
Mhm.
I'm sure that most people on this call know the interest game. It's like, what is my credit card? What am I even paying right now? A
Yep.
lot of times you don't know. And I'm saying that as a banker, right? So,
Yep.
but from a common knowledge perspective. So all these things matter. And I think in Africa, no one actually expects Africa to compete. It's like there's
Mm.
two sides of the brain. It's like one side is like, you're needy, so I'm going to give you aid. And the
Yep.
other side is like, no, you're smart, I could invest. And that smart invest is just not there. And back to your topic, it's branding. It's what is the
Right.
African narrative? And that
Mhm.
narrative just doesn't lend itself to investment. It doesn't lend itself to opportunity. And so
Mhm.
there's this vast amount of opportunity, highly educated youth,
Mhm.
like 70% are like under 18, like very strong. I think it's in 2 decades, 1 in 4 people will be African. We're talking about large volumes of populations. We're talking about a demographic dividend. Like if you look at what happened in India and in China the last several decades, what was that? It was that population growth.
Mhm.
It was that expansion. It was that, technology. And so if you just look at and take those case studies, you can already see what the projection is. And I
Mhm.
think that you'll see that as like Italy did their whole like Italy and Africa. They invited all the heads of state. China has done that. The US has done that. So they see those numbers. They know that this shift is happening. I think that the issue is that people don't know how to partner, how to like reframe how they look at Africa and what the opportunities are versus just extracting the natural resources. And I think that there's a bit of an uphill battle with people in the continent to be able to tell that story better and make it more effective. So the unexpectedness of it is that the numbers you mentioned, nobody would know that. And if you did know the numbers, it's kind of like they don't stick with you. Like it kind of gives you the shock factor, but you don't know what to do with it because your narrative is so programmed around, you know, this population needs the developed world more versus looking at where that partnership can happen, where this investment's happening in like Silicon Valley, and you know, for like a 10% risk, right? In Ethiopia or anywhere in Africa, a lot of these startups, you know, a small $2,000, $5,000, like you have like a 60% probable chance of at least doubling, tripling, 10 times 20x what you're putting in. So like the market itself, the opportunities themselves are so, you know, we're talking about like low-hanging fruit. So I think that's like the bigger piece about it. It's not about the numbers and about the opportunity. It's really truly about the narrative, and the narrative being kind of like against our programming. Like that's what I would call it. I'd call it a program that we have to kind of like deprogram first and then upload this new program, which is this new global shift. Yeah.
Well said, Lulite. Larry, any response to that?
Well, I'm really listening and well schooled, and I think part of it, Lulite, I have a question back to you, and then we're going to move on to the next section. Is also, like DC alluded to, the United States of America is one country. Africa, I don't know, I don't even know how many countries there are on the continent of Africa, but there are a lot, and all the governments are very different. So that's part of what you're dealing with too, in that what government and government regulations and whatnot is probably also part of the issues of what's Africa, because nobody else talks about any other continent as a continent except when we talk about Africa. So that's part of the challenge, I would think. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, so many layers. Yeah, it's a region, and it's 54 confirmed. You know, although there's more. But the government breakdown, yes. We have, I think that's the Africa Union that's also created like an Africa Free Trade Zone. So those are types of policies that are like aligning, I would call it the cross-border trade policies, and kind of trying to make it like more of like, you know, United States of Africa. They talk about that a lot now. So, you know, I think that there is the differences of government cultures, of course, but you know, it's happening in, you know, the EU and other places. So from a regional perspective, I think that the core of it is the same, meaning like the narrative is the same, how they view that risk, and also the transparency. But as we've moved into modern technology, adopted different softwares, you know, these people have gotten, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs have gotten, you know, international funding. They have to provide certain transparent reports and things that kind of meet a more of an international standard. I do think that there's more of a window of opportunity for partnership, especially with the US and Western countries.
That's great. Awesome. Let's put a capper on that. D, ready to move to the next section?
I am ready to go. I'll just say this, brand nerds, again, in the spirit of the stuff you don't know about the stuff you know. 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. All right, 5 questions. All right, Lulite, this next section, I ask a question, Larry asks a question, we go back and forth until we arrive at 5. I get the honor of kicking this thing off. Take yourself back, Lulite, to when you had a branding experience, your first branding experience, where it just lit you up. You could not get enough of engaging with this brand, talking with this brand, watching this brand, experiencing this brand, almost a bit like a first love. What was this brand experience for you?
Starbucks.
That was quick,
Okay.
Did you notice that?
That was okay. We need to hear about that.
So Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. So like coffee is like a big thing. I mean, and I would say that, that over time, I don't think it's the quality is as good as it was, but I started drinking coffee at like, I don't know, I was really young. Let's just say I was too young to be drinking coffee.
Okay, all right.
And then they had the nice little lattes, and then I started talking my mom into getting it for me before school. So, and I would get like like little, well, this is a different one, but the little Starbucks mugs and like all of their like little cups, and yeah, and it just kind of, I don't know what it was. I think it was also the community aspect of it. It's like, and I think it's also a cultural thing too. It's like we would always kind of say, oh, let's go for bunna, and like bunna is coffee. And it's kind of like, just like, let's grab a coffee. Let's just hang out. Let's kind of like enjoy each other. And so that's kind of why I think I gravitated to Starbucks. I had my drink. I could go to like 20 and like, a 5 mile radius, and they all had the same exact drink, made the same exact way. So I really appreciate that. I'm like a creature of habit sometimes too. So once I start a thing, it's kind of like, I really like a brand that can kind of meet that need every time. So my love for coffee, and then also the community aspect of just cafes. I actually still want to own a cafe of my own one day.
Okay.
And yeah, then I got into the Black Starbucks Reserve, where they kind of like tell you what country it comes from. I think it's just like the culture and the education behind the brand, I think is what
Mhm.
stuck with me.
Mm,
It's like, that's cool.
mm.
There's
Yeah.
a romantic nature to it that they've done Howard Schultz has done a great job of
Yeah.
from the first Starbucks in Seattle and emanating that out to the world. That's a
Yeah.
really cool brand. D, any
Yeah.
thoughts?
No, let's hit the next one, brother.
Let's do it. Okay, so Lulite, who has had or is having the most influence on your career?
I don't know if I have one person that's influencing my career now, but I will say, mm, earlier on in my career, I wouldn't say early on, but probably like when I started going into anti-money laundering and more of like the more global business type of um, banking areas, and mostly in risk strategy, was my mentor. So he was my mentor first, and then I went and I worked for him. And
What's his name?
his name is Mark. He's retired now. But Mark would give me that feedback that he would have to put that disclaimer like HR is not gonna like this. And I was like, it's okay, And he would give me that feedback that like, he's a white male, military background, poker face, we're like complete opposites. But he would always give me the feedback that I needed to hear, regardless of if it was comfortable for him to deliver it, regardless on if I could consume it, if I was ready to like comprehend it fully yet. And I grew up in Texas, and so when I went to New York, sometimes when I get really comfortable, that Southern hospitality, that Southern slang comes out.
Hmm.
And I was interviewing with people in New York, and he was like, listen, when you go up there, pretend like you're a British woman having tea, you know?
Mm.
And he was so afraid to give me this feedback. So he gave me all the HR disclaimers. I was like, Mark, just say it. And he even did the whole like sitting up and like, holding the teacup, like fake
Hmm.
teacup. And what it did was, is like, it kind of like, for the first time, made me aware of myself, which I've
Hmm.
just kind of been a bold person. I just do what I want. I say what I want. And it worked for me, up until that point where now I was going into more of a role that had like, there's a political nature to it. Once you're getting into more leadership, there's a political nature. You need to network. You need to know how you're carrying yourself. You need to know what your perception is when you walk in the door, what people think of you. And he was just able to like give me that no matter what, unfiltered, and I could get information, and then I could then use that to like have awareness, And so yeah, and I appreciate that. I've met a lot of leaders, and they would never have done that. In fact, I would share the story one time, like we had a conference, and I was interviewing my previous chief risk officer on stage, and I mentioned this because he had already moved on. So I felt, okay, I can share this without getting him in trouble. And she's a British woman, and she just like busted out laughing, you know? And I was watching Downton Abbey, like I tried it, and she was just like on stage, like completely losing all of her demeanor. And I was like, does this really help you get promoted? And of course, she didn't want to like admit. But what Mark was basically trying to say, he was speaking to the narrative, he's speaking to the brand. And he was like, when we have people from, I'm in risk, right? And a lot of that are PhD in statistics and so forth. So I was a black lamb in all aspects, right? I didn't have the mathematics background. I wasn't super, I didn't do heavy analytics. I was a person of color, which, wasn't really, Asian was not considered a person of color in risk, because most people in the department were Asian or white. And so there was a lot of branding of, there was people that might have fit a certain demographic and they would just immediately think they were smart, right? So there is a thing behind it. And even when he's talking about, the British are more of like the mannerism, right? It's about, how often do you think someone that comes in with a Texas, Southern slang is going to be the smartest person in the room when, they could be. And so it's like what he was doing was taking a risk by telling me how important brands are and how it is important to know what perception you walk in the room with, because it's whether or not that person's hearing you or not. And isn't that the whole psychology of it? When you're speaking and communicating, you can't communicate unless you know who your audience is, right? Because the whole point of communicating is that that person's actually hearing your message. And so I think that was something I really appreciated. Amazing mentor of mine, still a great friend, and I value him. And it also set a stage for how I would mentor people as well in the future. So
that was good. I got nothing to add. I mean, Mark is. I was going to ask you if you're still in touch, and you are. That's great.
yes,
He sounds awesome.
he is. Yeah.
Do you have anything to add before we go to the next question?
Just one quick thing, and then I'm going to go directly to the next question. Lulite, you did what many do. You walked into that interview thinking, I am Lulite Ejigu, and I'm going to tell you what I'm about.
Yeah.
What you failed to realize until Mark brought it to your attention is that the interviewer saw you as an archetype, not as Lulite.
That's right.
And that's what happens with many, many folks. With that, I'll go to the third question. You've had many successes over the course of your career, platitudes, flowers, congratulations. We don't want to know about any of those with this third question. Not a one. We want to know about the L's. What's your biggest F up? And importantly, what did you learn from it, Lulite?
Well, there's many. But since this is not an interview, I won't like convert it into a positive.
Please don't.
Oh no, we wouldn't let you do that.
I would always do that in interviews. Okay, what's the con? Okay, then how can I make the positive?
Yeah. As my daughters have taught me, Lulite, sorry to cut you off. This ain't that. So
I know.
Give it to us real.
So I'm just gonna give it to you raw. And I don't think I actually admitted this to anyone either. I had a manager, and we were going through a number of changes in the projects that we're doing. We were, and there was a lot of frustration because there was a lot of transition, a lot of different leadership changes around the department, different ideas of what roles and what things should be priority. And, there was a lot of changes happening, and meetings that you weren't involved in, or you're supposed to be involved in, being, like that whole kind of like office politics that was kind of coming about. And I was at such a high level of frustration that I would basically, anything that would irritate me, I would believe that he did it. And what I did is I blamed him for changing a report when I did it myself.
Wow.
And I blasted him on email. I copied everyone and their mother on it. I wrote this whole thing, because and so the F up wasn't the fact that, I didn't realize that he didn't touch the report. The bigger like mess up here was that it was an assumption. I just assumed he would behave exactly how he's always showed me that he would behave, or that whatever or I guess based off of my perception, right, of what was going on. And maybe to this day, I just didn't know the whole picture, right? And I've grown and learned so much since this incident, you know. But I think the bigger part was I just assumed, because I was in a frustrated emotional state, and because I'm also I can suppress my frustrations till I kind of like blow a can. And I normally get my numbers right, you know, I cross my T's, dot my I's, and when I'm going after you, it's like I feel very vindicated and validated, like you deserved it. You know, like I'll convince myself you deserved it, and then I will like, you know, I mean, you should have seen that email. I mean, you should have seen it. I mean, I had people on there who had to go back, pull the reports to see who logged in and who didn't log in. I mean, it was to that point. And just to all find out he never logged into that report.
Wow.
I mean, and it was senior people. It was bad. It was bad.
Wow.
And so what I learned, and it took me a couple years to learn it. So for one, it was one I messed up on assuming. But two, what I really learned out of that is just to give grace. You know, you never know what people are going through. You never know what the intent is. And just always understanding that whatever's for you is for you. Whatever you need to learn from it, you know, it's in your path. The universe has sent it to you in your path for you to like be able to learn that. It's like, you know, you can't be the top talent, perfect person all the time. You know, like someone may disagree with you, and someone may not like you for good reasons or not good reasons, but it doesn't really matter. It's there to kind of actually evolve you. They're just there to be a mirror for the places where you need to kind of grow and evolve. And that evolution is painful. So you have to make mistakes in order to evolve. You have to, you know, fall short in order to kind of see where you're falling short. So that's kind of the place, I think. So it ended up being one of I mean, I was so embarrassed, so embarrassed. And yeah, it took me some years to really understand the full lesson. You know, not just the surface lesson, but the full lesson of all of it. Yeah. So.
Lulite, that's honestly one of the best. We have biggest F ups that we put back out, and this is one of the best ones we've had in the 150 plus. I mean, because of the rawness that you said and the honesty of it, and most importantly, what you said is the learning, the give grace part, because and these are the kind of things sometimes in reflection that you can't see at the time, and you put the context to it. You're frustrated, and all these things were going on, and it's taken me a long time, quite honestly. I think of the fights I picked, especially back in our Coca-Cola days, when you sort of felt like if you didn't fight, you were going to get run over. And so, you know, my natural reaction as a New Yorker is I ain't getting run over, so I'm fighting. And so there were times I picked fights when it was stupid. It wasn't smart. And you're better served to really realize when you do have to, quote unquote, fight back, versus letting, as you said, let the universe take care of what happens going forward, rather than you be the one who infiltrates the vindictiveness or whatever needs to happen. Let the universe take care of it. I'm blown away by this.
You know, and Larry, it's kind of like the bullies become the bully.
Right.
You know? It's like, I'm feeling bullied, and I'm feeling like I'm protecting my colleagues, right? By like being this voice or being this pushback. And all the while it converted into me being, and I couldn't see at the time because I really convinced myself, no, you're the one on the white horse. You're on the white horse, Lily. Keep going, keep doing it, keep fighting, you know? And you know, I actually tanked my immune system because of that.
Wow.
So it's like, you know, it's like that's the kind of, I think when I say the universe, and I also say like your body, your experiences will allow you to know when you're misaligned, you know, when you're either fighting too hard and or not allowing things to kind of flow and take its rightful process, you know. So you can't rush the process. You have to learn. You have to like learn how to be humble and also just keep, keep reminding yourself about vulnerability. It's just a program. Like you said, you're a New Yorker, you're trying to survive and you kind of get into the fight or flight mode. And that's not the place we're supposed to be in. We're supposed to get back aligned, get grounded, and reevaluate, where we are. And that's kind of like how we can learn and grow.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you
So
have anything to
Lulite,
add?
none. Quick comment, and then I'm going to pass the rock to Larry. Two things. You said earlier you don't like conflict, Lily,
No.
and then you said you suppress.
Right.
But then when it comes out, oh, we getting ready to get it popping when
Yeah.
it comes out. So
Well,
this is something I find to be very, very interesting, and I want to come back to that later. But Lily, now I
sure.
want to go to LT. All right,
Sure.
LT. Next question, brother.
All right. So Lulite, regarding technology and marketing, can you tell us where you think marketers should lean in or best leverage tech, or go to areas that they should be leery or simply avoid?
There's a lot of buzz about AI and, machine learning. I mean, it's been going on for a while, right? We've had these tools
Yep.
that can
We've
come.
had a lot of conversations on the show about it.
Yeah, we've had a lot. I think that like, technology is a tool, you know. You
Yep.
can't outsource the human touch, you can't outsource um, you know, the thought, the strategy, and dare I say, like your God consciousness. And so I just think that it's important to leverage technology as a tool set, as one of the tool sets that we use. And I think it differs in each scenario. Like there's places where I think you might be going through tons of data and you need to like be able to like synthesize it and summarize it to where it's like useful, then that makes sense. If you want to like create a template and then duplicate that quickly, great. But I mean, I think that there's a lot of hype around it, around technology and how it's being used. But I think that the bigger piece is just most of the time what I see is people saying something's a tech company, it's like a real estate company. It's like the
Right.
companies that are going out and getting VCs and funding. I'm like, that's a property management company. Where's the tech? Oh,
Right.
there's a website that we call it a prop tech. It's like, what? It's like, so I think that there's a little bit of an overuse of it. And what I've always found, just in my work experience is that like a lot of times you use technology and you're just going to F up faster. So, and you get further away from the process. And then everyone's like, well, can you go find the person who built the code? And then can you then go find the person who cleaned the data? And then can you then find the person who did the analytics around it? And what did they take off of this page? So you get further away from the problem. So I'm sorry. What was the question again?
No, you're good.
You're
Honestly,
good.
this is part of what the realm of what we want in the range, and we love what you said. DC, unless you have anything to add, I think we can go to the next question.
I do not. This is the final of the five, Lily.
Okay.
Sister, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of what I'm doing as the chair of the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund. I think the diaspora not only has a unique position, an obligation, really, a sacred obligation to serve, people back home and our communities back home in Africa. I think as a first generation, I was born in America, raised, I'm more Texan than I am anything else. And I still feel like this, obligation to help provide, wherever my gifts are. And I think that what we're doing with we're running a summit. So it's going to be an innovation summit. It's going to be in Addis end of this month and early next month. So it's like 2 days, the 31st of January and February 1st. And we have raised 1.2 million for that program. We'll be giving out $750,000 in grants. I mean,
Wow.
nothing like it has ever been done, for startups. in Ethiopia, but I think in the continent. I mean, usually you'll see 5, 10 grand. This is, the top winner's making is the top winner will win $150,000. We've partnered
Nice.
with the UN development program. They're, doing the applications. They're going to be making a customized accelerator for them. And I think the uniqueness of it is there's no capital, right? There's like, I mean, I'm going to say limited access to capital. There's like basically no capital.
Mhm.
And then you also have all the cultural and all of the different, like navigating the atmosphere. A lot of our board and a lot of our advisory people that will be helping these finalists have, networks, have large companies, both in the US and other, other places in Europe and other countries as well as in Ethiopia. So I think that like us being a part of their advisory board, us providing these grants, us giving them the mentorship and advisory, and working with the UN to help them navigate the local ecosystem. I just don't see how there's not going to be a unicorn coming out of this program.
Wow.
And so I'm just so excited about it because I think that like, the biggest differentiation is not money. It's like the love and the passion that you put into supporting. And
Right.
like, that's why I said, like even if you didn't ask me who, like as in a person to change my experiences, that was the most impactful, I still would have said my mentor. I just think mentorship is just so important, and so he was my first mentor. And it changed my complete view of what makes people successful and how to navigate. So that's what I'm the most proud of. I'm really, really proud of being a part of this kind of this landscape or this movement, and also with my passion, and I'm writing this book that hopefully will launch soon. And I think I'm really proud of kind of being at the beginning of the funnel of this kind of like inflow and
Right.
kind of being one of the vehicles for that. So that's really exciting.
Fantastic,
That's dope.
Lulite. Fantastic. We are done with 5 questions. We are now
Yeah.
moving on to the next segment. LT?
All right. So, DC, Lulite, what is popping? What's popping?
What's popping?
Yeah. I mean, there's
Lulite,
so much.
this is our chance to shout down, or simply air something happening in around marketing today that we think is good fodder for discussion. And we understand from our super producers, Jade and Haley, that you have a really good one. So hit us with it.
Oh, so, I mean, well, I guess it's on topic, because it's something I'm just interested about. And I think as we were talking about, kind of the change about, the US is important, right? Regardless if you're American or not, the US is a big pinnacle of like how the global world operates. And so having a new administration come in, having all the changes in regulation, the trade tariffs that are going to be coming on from Mexico and Canada and China, all these big players that are going to be having significant tariffs. We're not talking about small tariffs, very, very high tariffs. And regardless of what that means on balancing the U.S. economy and inflation, it poses a very unique opportunity for manufacturing and service industries in Africa that have vastly grown. I know manufacturing in Ethiopia is 1/8 the cost of China. Many people don't know that.
Wow. Say that again,
Wow.
please.
Yeah, the manufacturing cost and servicing cost in Ethiopia is 1/8 the price of China. So
Wow.
Ethiopia is China's China. And they've been expanding that, not just in Ethiopia, but across Africa, playing very significant roles. So it'll be interesting if we can start marrying current events and current opportunities real time and actually start to see trade agreements happen where we are doing the servicing and manufacturing in Africa, and then exporting that to the US as a way of trade tariffs that will then actually move away from the Chinese economy and other places. So it's really interesting. I think that's something I'm watching very closely. And I hope that, with a lot of the financial markets, Ethiopian Stock Exchange opened up last week. So now they have a new stock market.
Wow.
Their financial regulations open up. So now you're allowed to have a foreign bank in Ethiopia. That also opened up this year. I mean, so there's just so much happening that I'm really excited to be a part of this, you know, part of the ecosystem working on startups and to see kind of what's happening. And also how, you know, these policies can be smarter ways to increase GDP and reduce the dependence on aid, because it's not sustainable, right? One, the U.S. can't keep giving this volume of aid, but also two, it minimizes the amount of people or countries that can actually develop, right? Because if you're dependent, you're not working on the strengths to be independent. So I think that that's the key pieces there. So I'm excited to see, and I hope that there'll be more U.S. Africa partnerships because of it. That a lot of that focus that's in the Eastern and Asia and other places also start looking at Africa as an opportunity. And I hope to be kind of like at the table with that. So that's really a passion of mine. So very changing quickly, right? Like we're seeing
Yes.
regulations and we might see agencies drop. I mean, we don't know what we're going to see. So it's an exciting time, but I think it's also, I'm optimistic that it's going to open up opportunities that haven't been opened up in a very long time, if ever.
D, thoughts?
I have a couple. I did not know this factoid of manufacturing in Ethiopia is 8% of that in China. Did not know that. I'm going to use an analog. I like sports programming, Lulite. One of my favorites is something called The Herd, and it's a sports show led by a gentleman named Colin Cowherd. It's on Fox. And what he does sometimes is he will talk about a quarterback in American football, and he will show an image outline of a quarterback, but he won't show you who the quarterback is. Just has an outline. Then he shows you the numbers, and he says, "Who do you think it is?" Lalit and Larry, every time he shows the people, because he populates the actual image later, it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know you were talking about that quarterback. I thought you were talking about someone different. And typically his point is who you think is really good isn't really that good.
Right.
And who you think is not that good is actually really good. It's all about perception. So now let me go to this. Brand nerds, math is the universal language round the world.
Yep.
What investors care about are three things most of the time: margins. So, how much am I paying for this thing or this business or organization or service? And what's the margin on that? Like, what's my profit margin on that? The second is multiple. If I invest in this thing, how many times X am I going to get from this? And then third is the exit. Upon exit, I get to cash in on that multiple as a result of these margins. That's it. That's it. And dare I say, if you lined up these three metrics and you just had a blank and you had one continent and another continent, and you said, okay, well, guess. I'm guessing most folks would say, oh, well, the one that's really on fire, that's got to be China. It ain't China, y'all. It's Africa. It's Africa. So that's my takeaway. That's my takeaway.
That's a great visualization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dean, that was great that you did. I would also
Thank you.
suggest that I love the quote that you have, Lulite, about that Ethiopia is China's China. I think that really
That's dope.
Yeah, that sticks in your mind. What I'm struck with is if you look back at history from Industrial Revolution onward, to DC's point, investors are always looking for margin. So they're always looking for a less expensive way to produce tangible goods. And it started, the first less expensive place was Japan. People don't realize that,
That's right.
post World War II, after everything happened. And then it started going into different parts of the Far East and whatnot. And this is just the natural matriculation to try and make goods less expensively. So while on the one hand, it's really cool, I think that that's great. I hope Ethiopia and the citizens of Ethiopia really, reap the rewards of that. I'm also feel like I have to say, because we also know in many parts of Asia that there are many of the workers who are basically paid slave labor. Let's be
Yeah.
honest. They're paid minuscule amounts of money. So I hope that the Ethiopians who are part of this manufacturing are actually going to make a living wage. I hope that that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Good point.
Right.
Absolutely.
Good point.
That is with like a living wage, and there's been actually new requirements of like minimums.
Cool.
90%, I think 90% or more in the manufacturing are women.
Wow.
That they eat together, work together. A lot of times have transportation together. So there's definitely a community fabric with it. Especially they've created like industrial parks where you have like housing and all of that all in the same thing, which makes the overall cost of living better as well. So there's just you would be surprised. And I think the visualization that EC said is just because you go into these centers and you don't feel that. You don't feel slave labor. You feel excitement. You feel them, working with each other, enjoying their day. And it's really, I think it's really great to see. And it's really great that it's also the numbers work, the opportunities work. And unfortunately, these larger companies have to figure out like, a more complex, like multi-channeled strategy. So
That's awesome. That makes me feel much better. And I think that that could be a prelude for some great things to come for Ethiopia and the African continent.
yeah.
Lulite, you are amazing. We're really at the end here. We're back to what our last segment is the show close, where DC and I both posit our learnings, and they were plentiful. And then at the end, if you would like to share anything that you've learned from this conversation, we'd love to hear that too. So I'm gonna kick us off here. I have 7 things, so I'm gonna hit them quick. Lilith discovered as she graduated college, and that was it was a time you mentioned it when the economy wasn't doing so well, and you have this psychology degree. What are you going to do? Go with the flow, brand nerds. Lilith discovered that sometimes the universe has other plans, and if you go with the flow, that can take you to a great place. So that's number one. Number two, like Lilith, find a mentor like Mark who will tell it to you like it is. There's mentors who will be wishy-washy, but not Mark. You got to find your Mark. So that's number two. Number three, Mark helped Lilith be conscious about herself. And so you need to do the same thing, brand nerds. You need to be conscious about who you are, what you bring. And the sooner you are conscious and discover this, the better it will be both for your career and for your life. So that's number three. Number four, your brand, like Lilith learned from Mark, is huge. Know it, and again, be conscious about it. Number five, like Lilith learned in her biggest F up, it's much better, brand nerds, when you see you're in the middle of something that you might want to fire off an angry email or whatever, sleep on it. Don't do anything. Give grace. That's much better. It's better to step away than pick fights and pile, or not pick fights, get in the fight and pile on. So that's number five. Number six, we all need to be thinking about mentorship, and that goes either ways. Finding a mentor and being a mentor yourself. That's number six. And the number seven one, I have to say it again because I think it's huge. Ethiopia is China's China. Those are my 7.
That's dope, brethren. That's dope. Before I go through my section here on what I've gained through this conversation with you, Lilith and Larry, I want to give a shout out to Tawanda, because Tawanda of Tenet Consulting is how we found you. And I will tell you, Lilith, she was not going to go quietly into the night until this thing got booked. So I want to shout out Tawanda one time, and also Akate and Nakia from Tenet Consulting.
Yes, we love those folks.
Yeah. So Lilith, I don't know if you've listened to any of our podcasts previously, and it's cool if you have not. But something that I attempt to do at the end, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, is to articulate what I believe the human in front of me has for the world that is uniquely them, what they can offer the world. Now, you offer the world many, many things, but I listen to not just what you say, but what you mean. And brand nerds, you've heard me say this before, 95% of communication is nonverbal. That would be 9-5. Here's what I got from my conversation with you. Under the theme of Oren Katzif's The Stuff You Don't Know About the Stuff You Know, I started out in Get Comfy giving some facts about the African middle class. And the last word I said was perception. And you said, hey, I want to talk that word perception there is important. And then you talked about why that was important. In your book, I picked up the word unexpected. Your book is The Unexpected Global Shift. And again, you said there is a perception of Africa. Yeah, but it's not an accurate perception. Yeah. Then on Ethiopia, when we talked about your favorite brand, you said Starbucks, and then you mentioned that Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. I did not know that. Yeah. That is not the perception of Ethiopia.
I didn't know that either. That's really cool.
Yeah, that is the perception.
Coffee is named after Kaffa.
Wow. Yeah, did not know that. The perception is that it's not necessarily from Ethiopia. Mark, your mentor, when he told you to get your Downton Abbey on, that was about perception of the interviewer. He was looking out for that for you. And then in an interesting twist, the answer to the question of the biggest fuck up, F up, Lulite, which you answered remarkably. And you talked about how you went after this dude who didn't even make the mistake. That, I think, was about the protection of perception of your team and you.
Yep.
So all of this to me boils down to surprise, surprise, perception. Okay, I'm arriving at a point. My mother, Lulite, rest in power, when I would drone on, she would say, baby, are you arriving at a point? And I would say, yeah, mama, I'm arriving at a point. So Lulite and Larry, I'm arriving at a point here. There's a saying that many of us have heard, and that is, don't judge a book by the cover. That's a perception statement. In your case, I think it's a bit more complicated than that, Lulite. What I believe that you are bringing to the world, among other things, but just in my vantage point from a marketing perspective, is through all of these different examples and more, you have demonstrated an uncanny ability to read the room while people are reading you. This is a gift, Lulite, to simultaneously, quickly read a room. Like, okay, what's happening in this interview? All right, we're about to do this conference and we want to make it about some real money, or I'm talking to you now about your debt and how I know you're having some problems, but I need to work with you and get this money. Like all of these situations, the thread that I find in them that's unique about you, Lulite, is that as data is getting dropped, you're reading the room almost like a computer, reading the room at the same time people are reading you. And here is the kicker. Lulite. Nobody knows you're reading the fucking room. They don't know. They just think you're talking. They don't know that you're analyzing the room. So that's what I've gotten in this conversation from you as to what I think is one of your extraordinary gifts that you offer the world.
That's honestly amazing that you picked that up in this short time. I actually see it as my superpower. A lot of times I don't like people making decisions for me if I wasn't in the room, because I'll pick up an energy, like I'll pick up where they're going with it. I remember previous mentor said that I was like the best, like I no one interviewed would like me than her entire career. I would always give her the answer before she asked the question. And she was like, I don't know how you do that. And I never thought about it then. I mean, I was young and it was like my second job. So it's like I hadn't even interviewed that much. But I think that the bigger piece is like being aware. And I think that when you're so focused on yourself, it's hard to focus on it's hard to connect.
Right.
I think it's
Mm.
less about like reading, it's more about just connecting, you know? And I think that right now we're just in so much autopilot, you know, we're just so much information, so much data, so much, you know, responsibility. And it's like, but did that meet what we wanted it to be? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, like, it's like, I have to ask that almost every day. Like, when we put that out, did we expect it to go that way? Oh, we didn't. Then why don't we start over? Or why don't we change it? Oh, well, we already built it now. Like, what? You know, so it's just this, you know, we want to get it done. We want to check the box. And I read a book a long time ago that says it's the difference between a transactional leader and a transformational one. And I am like, I wouldn't like, if you put me in a box, I'm going to figure out how to like break the box down. And if you say I can only do something, I'm going to like, you know, it's not from an ego perspective to say, oh, I'm going to do the exact opposite, but it's more of just like, I know that everything is more expansive than that, more fluid than that. And I don't even want to be held by what I say here today. In 6 months, I might have evolved, you know, I might disagree with everything I'm saying right now and have a whole new or deeper perspective. So I don't even want to be compared or held to the last version of myself. So it's like, I just keep everything like it's moving and it's evolving. And a lot of times I get in trouble because I say a lot of things that I later regret. Hence why I don't do a lot of public talks. But, you know, I think that I found that it's better to speak and it's better to use that voice and not have the fear of how it will be taken. Because I think that if you give yourself that grace and you give yourself that vulnerability, then other people will allow themselves to be vulnerable too. You're giving them permission by your actions. And so I think that that's a big piece. And I'm going to have to share this podcast with Mark.
Yes,
Do it.
please do.
Please share it with Mark.
Please
What up,
do.
Mark?
Yeah.
Great
Thanks,
mentee.
Mark.
Yeah.
Great mentee. All right.
Yeah.
So Lulite, before I turn this over to you, Larry teed this up for you to let us know what you got from this discussion with us. I just want to say one thing. This is my request and challenge to you. You said that you have been able to do this reading of the room while people are reading you since you were a young person. All right.
Yeah.
You're a youngster. So that means the universe has put something in you that is a gift. It's yours. I tell my daughters, and my eldest daughter here, she's on our right here on the background. Her name is Haley. She's my eldest daughter. And so my challenge to you is that in your mentoring yourself, just like Mark did, he had a different gift, is that you would let your mentees know how you read the room, what you're reading, who you're reading it, why you're reading it, and when you're reading it. These 5 questions. Because I believe that if you took the time to critically think and interrogate the answers to these 5 questions, what is natural to you, along with work that you've done to refine it, could become awe-inspiring to others. That would be my request and challenge to you. So with that,
I think I just got my next book.
okay, all right, cool.
The 5 senses of perception.
Cool. Oh, love that. Love that. All right. So what did you get from this conversation with us, if anything?
One, I really liked how you guys, took more of like, let's get this other factual piece to shape the conversation. So just like bringing in like the stats and the data and grounding it, comparing it, like, you know, in finance, we like to say, okay, what is this against the industry benchmark? You know, you benchmark my conversation, whether it was in branding or whether it was, a psychological thing or a theory or, just a specific business, you grounded and created that benchmark. And I think that that's so important because that benchmark then immediately creates a visual. And when you visualize something or when you can create a tagline, you remember it. Like it's just, you remember it. And I think that that's kind of how I think of things too. And I know a lot of people are consuming so much information. So really being able to do that and adding more to Yeah, I agree. I didn't have that perception. That's something I didn't know. And I think that it really helped me too to see how much am I just kind of like speaking to a wall, and how much of this is like
Mm,
actually for anyone who's never looked at it before, never looked at this topic,
mhm.
never looked at any stats, like just
Yeah,
looking at it and saying, is this interesting? And like how, like what does 1 in 4 people being African look like in 20 years? And that's like
yeah,
a
yeah.
real global shift. And and it's just like all under a veil, and we
Mhm,
have the opportunity, each one of us, the responsibility to know how our globe is changing, how that impacts our communities and our family. And I think that you guys really did that today. And you guys really challenged me to like know those numbers and know more stats. Like, I always like to come in with some numbers, but you guys really challenged that. And
mm,
I like that because I think that it's the branding, right?
mhm,
Right.
And it's like if we can come to a common truth or come to a common foundation, then we can kind of like really grow from there. So I think that it was a great level setting of the conversation. So I
mhm,
really appreciate that. And yeah, so I mean, that's I think what I got from this conversation is like, one, Mark is important to me, but it was another reminder that when you can just be vulnerable and not care about how it's going to land, you know?
mhm,
And that's actually something I'm personally, like my personal journey right now I'm working on is
mhm,
do what's right and do what you're supposed to do and don't even think about the results. Don't even think
yeah,
about the outcome at all. And it's
mm,
so against my nature because I'm an executor and I like to
mhm,
perform and I want to know what's the number or what's the thing I have to reach. And
mhm,
it's been really great because it's like do what you know you're supposed to do and not
mhm,
think about the result. And it always tends up to being better than I thought. So
Yep.
that's kind of what this conversation I think pulled out. It's like if everything kind of was summarized, it was for me, what I heard is perception and like taking the time to like make the same impact that Mark has
mhm,
had on me on someone else. And I mentor, but I never said, yes, I need to be the Mark and the next person. Like the next person that comes to this podcast that, that I know that's my mentee, she
yeah,
should be talking about how I changed her life in a way that I couldn't have imagined, and I'm sure Mark's going to be surprised when I send him this, send him this episode. So this reminding of that. And I think that's more of like, you're accountable. So if you're going to mentor, take the time to really think through, like you said, I call them the 5 senses of perception
mhm,
of why you do that, why you think it's important, and take that time out. And sometimes I don't always know that it's valuable. I discount
mhm,
it. And I'm constantly getting reminded that it's not, and it is valuable. And so I think that that's something that I'm going to take away from this is one, have the responsibility to like pass the torch and share because
mhm,
we're not going to get anywhere unless we're competing, you know? And it's something I, try to say for, countries in Africa. It's like, that's great for the domestic market, but if you're not competing against the US, if you're not competing against the globe, if you're
mhm,
not relevant, then why are we even talking about it? And so it's like, I think you need to compete. And I think that means it's holding a golden standard. And that means for mentorship, that means for work, that means for your personal life, your evolution, and the way you learn lessons. So that's what I'm really walking away from today. And, I might outline my
mhm.
book tonight, my next
There
one.
you
Do it,
go.
do it.
Well,
That's a
the
That's
fresh
the
mic
on the
drop.
capper.
mind.
That's a
That's the
mic drop.
capper.
That's a mic drop. All
That's
Yeah.
the
right,
mic
Larry.
drop. That is the mic drop. This has been awesome, Lulite. Thank you so much. And brand nerds, thanks for listening to Brands, Beats, and Bytes. The executive producers are Jeff Shirley, Daryl D.C. Cobbin, Larry Taman, Haley Cobbin, Jay Tate, and Tom Dioro.
The Podfather.
That is he. And if you do like this podcast, please subscribe and share. And for those on Apple Podcasts, if you are so inclined, we love those excellent reviews. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. And we look forward to next time where we will have more insightful and enlightening talk about marketing.